The firelight cast dancing shadows across Victoria Owens's face as she sat rigid on the rough log, her hand inching toward the rifle that lay just beyond her reach, while 4 men closed in around her campsite like wolves circling wounded prey. She had been traveling alone through the Colorado Territory for 3 weeks now, ever since her father's death had left her with nothing but a deed to a small piece of land near Fairplay and a desperate need to start over somewhere far from the memories that haunted her in Kansas. The men had appeared without warning, materializing from the darkness beyond her fire's glow, and now they stood between her and any hope of escape, their intentions written plainly in their leering grins and the way they fingered their gun belts. Now, little lady," the tallest one drawled, his breath reeking of whiskey even from 6 feet away. "No need to be reaching for that rifle. We just want to have ourselves a friendly conversation." Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "I have nothing you want. I suggest you move along before there's trouble." The men laughed, a sound that made her skin crawl. It was late September in 1878, and she had made camp in a small clearing off the main trail, thinking herself safe enough with the town of Fairplay, only a day's ride away. She had been so careful, so cautious throughout her journey, but somehow she had let her guard down tonight, exhausted from the day's travel and lulled by the peaceful sound of the nearby stream. "Oh, we think you got plenty we want," another man said, shorter and stockier than the first, with a scar running down his left cheek. "That's a nice horse you got there, nice supplies, and you're a mighty pretty thing all by yourself out here in the wilderness." Victoria's mouth went dry. She calculated the distance to her rifle again, knowing she would never make it before they drew their weapons. Her small pistol was tucked in her bedroll behind her, equally unreachable. She had been foolish, so desperately foolish, to think she could make this journey alone. But what choice had she had? There was no one left back home who cared whether she lived or died, no one to accompany her on this venture into unknown territory. "I said move along." She stood slowly, trying to make herself appear braver than she felt. "There's a patrol that comes through here regularly. They'll be along any minute." The tall man laughed again. "Now that's a lie if I ever heard one. Nearest law is back in Fairplay, and they don't ride out this far unless there's been trouble. Course, by the time anyone finds you, we'll be long gone." Victoria's fingers curled into fists at her sides. She refused to show fear, even as panic clawed at her throat. She thought of her father, of how he had taught her to shoot and ride and survive in difficult circumstances. He had raised her to be strong after her mother died when Victoria was only 8 years old. She would not dishonor his memory by falling apart now. "You touch me, and you'll hang for it," she said, her voice ringing with more confidence than she felt. "Gotta catch us first," the scarred man said, taking a step closer. Victoria tensed, preparing to fight or run or do whatever desperate thing might give her a chance, when she heard the sound of boots crunching on dried pine needles, steady and purposeful, coming from the darkness beyond the firelight. "The lady asked you to move along," a deep voice said, cutting through the night like a blade. "I suggest you listen." All heads turned toward the sound. A man stepped into the circle of firelight, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes that gleamed like steel in the flickering flames. He wore dusty trail clothes, a weathered brown duster hanging open to reveal a gun belt slung low on his hips, and he moved with the kind of easy confidence that came from a man who knew exactly what he was capable of. The tall leader of the group sized up the newcomer. "This ain't your concern, friend. Move along." "I'm making it my concern." The stranger's hand rested casually near his pistol, but there was nothing casual about the look in his eyes. "Now, you boys have 2 choices. You can walk away right now, or you can see how fast I can draw this Colt. I promise you won't like the second option." "There's 4 of us and 1 of you," the scarred man pointed out, though Victoria noticed his voice lacked conviction. The stranger smiled, but it was a cold expression that held no humor. "I'm counting on you boys being smart enough to do the math on your odds. See, I figure I can drop 2 of you before you clear leather, and the lady there looks capable of handling herself once the odds are evened up. Question is, which 2 of you want to die tonight over a woman who's made it clear she wants nothing to do with you?" The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Victoria held her breath, her body coiled and ready to dive for her rifle the moment the shooting started. She studied the stranger's face, trying to gauge whether he was bluffing or if he truly was as dangerous as he seemed. Something in his bearing suggested he had done this before, that violence was a language he spoke fluently. The tall leader's eyes darted between his companions, and Victoria saw the moment the fight went out of him. He was a bully and a coward, the kind of man who preyed on those weaker than himself, but folded when faced with real opposition. "This ain't worth it," he muttered. "Come on, boys. Plenty of other opportunities out there." "Smart choice," the stranger said, his hand never leaving the vicinity of his gun. "But, just so we're clear, if I see any of you following this lady, or if I hear about you bothering other travelers, I'll hunt you down personally, and I'm very good at hunting." The four men backed away slowly, keeping their hands visible, before turning and disappearing into the darkness. Victoria could hear them moving through the brush, their footsteps fading as they retreated. She waited, every muscle tense, until the sound of their horses' hoofbeats echoed in the distance, growing fainter and fainter, until silence reclaimed the night. Only then did she allow herself to breathe properly. She turned to face her rescuer, who was scanning the darkness beyond the firelight, apparently making sure the men were truly gone. "Thank you," she said, her voice shakier than she would have liked. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." The stranger turned his attention to her, and in the firelight she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of beard, and those startling gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. There was a hardness to him, a quality forged by experience and survival. But when he looked at her, something softened in his expression. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No, frightened, but not hurt." Victoria wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware that she was trembling. "They just appeared out of nowhere. I thought I was being careful." "You were unlucky. Those men have been working this territory for a few months now, preying on travelers. Name's Vance Brennan, by the way. I've been tracking them for the better part of a week." "You're a lawman?" "Not exactly." Vance moved closer to the fire, his movements careful and deliberate, as though he did not want to spook her further. "I do work for the law sometimes, tracking down men who need finding, but mostly I work for whoever's willing to pay for my services. In this case, a rancher near Fairplay hired me after those four stole some of his horses and roughed up one of his ranch hands." Victoria studied him, trying to reconcile the man who had just potentially saved her life with the idea of a bounty hunter or hired gun. Her father had always warned her about such men, saying they lived by violence and died by it too. But this Vance Brennan had shown her nothing but courtesy, and she owed him her gratitude at the very least. "I'm Victoria Owens," she said. "I'm traveling to Fairplay to claim some land my father left me." "Traveling alone?" Vance's eyebrows rose. "That's brave and dangerous." "I didn't have much choice." Victoria moved to put more wood on the fire, needing something to do with her hands. "My father died 2 months ago. He was all I had left, and there was nothing keeping me in Kansas. He had purchased land near Fairplay years ago, always talking about moving west someday. I decided to honor his dream, even if he couldn't be here to see it." "I'm sorry for your loss." Vance's voice held genuine sympathy. "How far have you come?" 3 weeks of hard riding. I'm hoping to reach Fairplay tomorrow if I start early." She paused, then added, "Will you be continuing after those men tonight?" "No. They're running scared now, and they won't stop until they're well clear of this area. I'll track them down in a day or two, after I'm certain you make it safely to town." He held up a hand when she started to protest. "I know you're capable, Miss Owens. You kept your head back there, and that takes courage. But those men might decide to double back once they realize I'm not with you. I'd sleep better knowing you reached Fairplay safely." Victoria wanted to argue that she did not need a protector, that she had managed well enough on her own for 3 weeks. But the truth was that she had been terrified tonight, and the thought of those men returning made her stomach clench with fear. Pride was one thing, but survival was another. "I would appreciate the company," she admitted, "but I don't want to interfere with your work. Like I said, they'll keep running for now, and Fairplay's where I'm headed anyway." Vance glanced around her camp, his eyes cataloging her supplies and setup with professional efficiency. "You've got a good spot here. Mind if I make my own camp nearby? I'll keep watch for a few hours, make sure our friends don't get any ideas about coming back." "Of course. There's coffee in the pot if you want some." "Much obliged." Vance disappeared into the darkness and returned a few minutes later with his horse, a rangy buckskin gelding that looked as trail-hardened as its owner. He unsaddled the animal and hobbled it near Victoria's bay mare, then set up his own bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. The whole process was accomplished with quiet efficiency, and Victoria found herself watching him with curiosity. He moved like a man accustomed to living rough, wasting no motion, every action purposeful. His gear was well maintained but worn, the rifle he carried a Winchester that had seen plenty of use. This was not a man playing at being dangerous. He was the genuine article, someone who had survived by his wits and his gun for longer than Victoria cared to imagine. When he settled by the fire with a tin cup of coffee, she found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "Have you been doing this kind of work long?" Vance regarded her over the rim of his cup. "About 7 years now. I was a ranch hand before that. Worked some cattle drives. But I had a disagreement with a foreman who thought he could shortchange the crew on our pay. Things got heated, and I realized I was better suited to working alone." "You don't ever want to settle down somewhere? Have a home?" The question seemed to surprise him. He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "I used to think about it. But this life doesn't lend itself to putting down roots. You make enemies when you're in my line of work, and those enemies have a way of finding you. Safer to keep moving." There was something lonely in his voice, a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. Victoria recognized it because she had felt the same thing herself since her father's death. They were both adrift, she realized, both trying to find some kind of purpose or place in a world that seemed determined to remain unsettled and dangerous. "What about you?" Vance asked. "What are you planning to do with this land in Fairplay?" "Build a life, I hope." Victoria pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The night air was growing cold now that the fire had died down to embers. "My father's deed includes a small cabin and about 40 acres. I thought I might raise some horses, maybe take in sewing or washing to supplement the income. I'm good with a needle, and I'm not afraid of hard work." "That's a lonely life for a woman by herself." "It's better than the alternative," she said quietly. "I had a suitor back in Kansas, a merchant's son, who thought marrying me would give him a claim to my father's property there. When he found out my father left me nothing but debt and that deed to Western land, he disappeared faster than snow in summer. I realized then that I didn't want a life where my worth was measured by what I could bring to a marriage contract." Vance nodded slowly. "Can't say I blame you, but Colorado territory can be harsh, especially in winter. Fairplay's high up in the mountains. You might want to consider finding work in town for a season or two before you try to prove up on that land. I'll do what I have to do." Victoria's voice came out sharper than she intended. She softened her tone. "I appreciate the advice, Mr. Brennan. I truly do. But I've made up my mind, and I'm not turning back now." A ghost of a smile crossed Vance's face. "I believe you. You've got steel in you, Miss Owens. Not many women would have handled tonight the way you did." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. She looked away, suddenly flustered in a way that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the way Vance's eyes seemed to see past her defenses. He was handsome, she admitted to herself, in a rough, weathered sort of way, and there was something compelling about his quiet confidence, the sense that here was a man who knew who he was and made no apologies for it. "You should try to sleep," Vance said, rising to add more wood to the fire. "I'll keep watch. We'll want to start early if we're going to make Fairplay by tomorrow evening." Victoria wanted to protest that he needed rest too, but the events of the evening had caught up with her. She felt suddenly exhausted, her earlier adrenaline draining away and leaving her hollow and shaky. She retreated to her bedroll, but sleep was slow to come. Every sound in the darkness made her tense, every snapping twig or rustling leaf a potential threat. From across the fire, Vance's voice came soft and reassuring. "They're gone, Miss Owens. I promise you, they won't be back tonight. Try to rest." Somehow, his words helped. Victoria closed her eyes and focused on the sound of the fire crackling, the steady rhythm of her mare's breathing, and the solid, reassuring presence of the man who had appeared out of the darkness to save her. When sleep finally claimed her, it was deeper and more peaceful than she expected. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon frying. The sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. Vance was already up, tending the fire and cooking breakfast with the ease of long practice. "Morning," he said when he noticed her stirring. "Figured we could both use a hot meal before we ride." Victoria sat up, pushing her hair back from her face. She felt stiff and sore from sleeping on the hard ground, but otherwise surprisingly refreshed. You didn't have to do that. No trouble. I was cooking for myself anyway, and your supplies are better than mine. He flashed her a quick grin that transformed his normally serious face. Besides, my mother raised me to have some manners, even if I don't always show them. They ate in companionable silence, the awkwardness of the previous night fading in the light of day. Victoria found herself studying Vance when she thought he was not looking, noticing details she had missed in the darkness. There was a scar along his jawline, faint but visible, and his hands bore the calluses of hard work and harder living. He was not a man to whom life had been kind, yet there was no bitterness in his manner, only a sort of pragmatic acceptance of the cards he had been dealt. They broke camp efficiently, working together to pack up the supplies and saddle the horses. Victoria noticed that Vance kept scanning their surroundings, his vigilance never wavering. It made her feel safer, knowing he was alert to any danger. But it also made her wonder what kind of life he led, always watching his back, never able to fully relax. The ride to Fairplay took them through some of the most beautiful country Victoria had ever seen. The trail wound through stands of aspen and pine, their leaves beginning to turn gold with the approach of autumn. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow, and the air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of earth and evergreen. Vance proved to be a good traveling companion. He was quiet, but not unfriendly, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of knowledge about the territory. He showed her which plants were safe to eat and which to avoid, where the best camping spots were, and how to read the signs of weather changes in the mountains. "You know a lot about this country," Victoria observed, as they paused at a stream to water the horses around midday. "I've spent enough time here." Vance dismounted and led his buckskin to the water's edge. "Colorado's beautiful, but it's unforgiving. You have to respect it, or it'll kill you. You make it sound almost alive. In a way, it is. The land has its own rhythms, its own rules. The people who do well here are the ones who learn to work with it instead of against it." He glanced at her. "That land your father left you, do you know exactly where it is?" "I have a map and a description from the surveyor. It's about 3 miles outside of Fairplay, up near a place called Beaver Creek." Vance's expression shifted, something thoughtful entering his eyes. "That's good land, high meadow country, good for grazing. There's timber nearby for building, and the creek runs year-round. Your father chose well. You know the area? I've passed through it. There's a few other homesteads scattered around there, folks trying to make a go of it. It's isolated but not completely cut off from civilization. You'll have neighbors within riding distance if you need help." The knowledge reassured Victoria. She had worried that she might be completely alone in the wilderness, with no one to turn to in an emergency. Knowing there were others nearby made the prospect of settling her land seem less daunting. They rode on, and as the afternoon wore on, Victoria found herself relaxing into the rhythm of travel. She was sore from long days in the saddle, but her body was adjusting, growing stronger and more capable with each mile. She felt a strange sense of freedom out here in the vast openness of the territory, as though she had shed some invisible weight that had been pressing down on her back in Kansas. Vance seemed to sense her mood. "It gets in your blood, this country. Once you've been here a while, it's hard to imagine living anywhere else. Is that why you stay, even though you said you keep moving?" "Part of it, and part of it is that I don't know where else I'd go. This is the only place that's ever felt close to home, even if I don't have an actual home here." Victoria wanted to ask him more, to understand what had shaped him into the man he was, but she held back. They were still strangers, despite the strange intimacy that danger and shared travel had created between them. She had no right to pry into his past, no matter how curious she might be. They reached Fairplay as the sun was setting, painting the town in shades of orange and purple. The settlement was larger than Victoria had expected, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along a main street, with smaller structures spreading out from the center like branches from a tree. There was a general store, a hotel, a saloon, a church, and various other establishments that spoke to a community trying to establish itself in the wilderness. "I know the owner of the hotel," Vance said as they rode down the main street. "She's a widow named Martha Fletcher, runs a clean establishment and serves decent food. You'll want a proper bed tonight after all those nights on the ground." "That sounds like heaven," Victoria admitted. She was exhausted, her body aching from the long ride, and the thought of a real bed and perhaps a hot bath was almost overwhelmingly appealing. Vance led her to a 2-story building near the center of town, with a painted sign that read, Fletcher's Hotel, hanging above the door. They dismounted and Vance helped her with her bags before leading the horses around back to the stable. Inside, the hotel was simple but welcoming. A woman in her 50s stood behind the front desk, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked up as they entered, and her stern expression softened when she saw Vance. "Vance Brennan, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you in these parts for a couple of months. Thought maybe you'd finally gotten yourself killed." "Not yet, Martha." Vance's tone was warm, the most relaxed Victoria had heard him sound. "I've brought you a customer. This is Miss Victoria Owens. She's come to claim land near Beaver Creek and could use a room and a hot meal." Martha's sharp eyes assessed Victoria, but there was kindness in her gaze. "Come to make a go of it on your own, have you? That takes courage. Welcome to Fair Play, Miss Owens. I've got a room on the second floor, nice and quiet. Bath water's extra, but I suspect you'll want it." "Please," Victoria said gratefully, "and I'd appreciate any advice you could offer about settling in the area. I'll tell you everything I know over supper. Why don't you get yourself cleaned up, and I'll have food ready in about an hour." Martha pulled a key from the board behind her and handed it to Victoria. "Room 7, top of the stairs and to the right." Victoria thanked her and turned to Vance, suddenly uncertain. "Will you join us for supper? I feel like I owe you at least a meal for everything you've done." Something flickered in Vance's eyes, an emotion Victoria could not quite name. "I'd be honored, Miss Owens." "Please, call me Victoria. I think we've been through enough together that formality seems a bit silly." "Victoria, then, and you can call me Vance." She smiled at him, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the heat from the hotel's stove. "I'll see you in an hour." The room was small but clean, with a bed that looked gloriously soft, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the street. A knock came a few minutes later, and 2 young men carried in a copper bathtub and several buckets of hot water. Victoria tipped them from her dwindling supply of coins and then sank into the bath with a sigh of pure bliss. As she washed away the dirt and sweat of 3 weeks on the trail, her mind kept returning to Vance. There was something about him that drew her, something beyond simple gratitude for his help. He was different from any man she had known back in Kansas, more genuine somehow, without the false pleasantries and social posturing that had characterized most of her interactions with men in civilized society. But she was also practical enough to recognize the danger in her attraction. Vance had made it clear that he was not a man who settled down, that his work kept him moving from place to place. Getting attached to him would be foolish, a recipe for heartache. She was here to build a new life for herself, one based on independence and self-reliance, not on dependence on a man who might disappear at any moment. Still, when she dressed in her cleanest dress and went downstairs for supper, her heart beat a little faster at the thought of seeing him again. Vance was waiting in the hotel's small dining room, cleaned up himself and looking almost civilized in a fresh shirt. He stood when she entered, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. Victoria felt her cheeks warm under his gaze, suddenly self-conscious, in a way she had not been since she was a girl. "You look lovely," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made the compliment all the more precious. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." Martha served them a hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie, joining them at the table with her own plate. She was a font of information about Fair Play and the surrounding area, telling Victoria about the other settlers, the best places to buy supplies, and the challenges of making a living in the high country. "Winter comes early and stays late up here," Martha warned. "You'll want to make sure your cabin is properly chinked, and that you have plenty of firewood laid by before the first snow. And you'll need livestock to see you through. Chickens at least, maybe a milk cow if you can afford it." "I have a little money left," Victoria said. "Enough to get started, I hope." "The general store owner is fair in his prices. Tell him I sent you, and he'll treat you right." Martha looked between Victoria and Vance, a speculative gleam in her eye. "You planning on helping Miss Owens get settled, Vance?" Vance shifted in his seat. "I need to finish tracking those men I was telling you about. But I thought I'd ride out with Victoria tomorrow, help her find her land and make sure the cabin is sound." "That's good of you," Martha said, her tone suggesting she thought it was more than just good manners. A woman on her own needs all the help she can get starting out. After supper, Vance walked Victoria out onto the hotel's front porch. The night air was cool and crisp, and stars blazed overhead in a sky unpolluted by city lights. Victoria wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and looked up at the vast expanse of the Milky Way, feeling small and insignificant and strangely exhilarated all at once. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "I can see why my father wanted to come west. It has a way of getting under your skin." Vance leaned against the porch railing, his face half in shadow. "Victoria, I want to say something, and I hope you won't take it the wrong way." She turned to look at him, her heart suddenly beating faster. "What is it?" "You're a remarkable woman. I've met a lot of people in my work, and most of them would have fallen apart in the situation you were in last night. But you kept your head. You were scared, but you didn't let the fear control you. That takes real strength." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them away. "I was terrified. I just didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing it. That's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but acting despite it." Vance hesitated, then continued. "I know I said I need to track down those men, and I do. It's my job, and I gave my word. But after that's done, if you need help getting your place set up, I'd be willing to stick around for a bit. I'm handy with tools, and I know the country. Could save you some trouble." Victoria's breath caught. She wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to accept his offer and the promise of more time in his company. But she forced herself to think practically. "I can't pay you much, just room and board, maybe a little money once I get the place producing. I'm not asking for pay. Consider it a favor for a friend. We barely know each other. Sometimes you know people better after a few days of hard travel than after years of polite socializing. I'd like to help, Victoria, if you'll let me." She looked at him, at the earnest expression in those gray eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest. This was dangerous territory, opening herself up to the possibility of caring for someone, of depending on them. But it was also a gift, freely offered, and she found she did not want to refuse it. "I'd be grateful for the help," she said quietly. "Thank you, Vance." He smiled, and in that moment, with the starlight painting his features in silver and shadow, Victoria felt the first stirring of something deeper than gratitude. It frightened her, this feeling, but it also made her feel more alive than she had in months. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while longer, neither wanting to break the spell of the moment. Finally, Vance straightened and tipped his hat to her. "You should get some rest. We'll ride out to your property in the morning, see what we're working with." "Good night, Vance." "Good night, Victoria." She watched him walk away into the darkness, his tall form disappearing down the street towards wherever he had stabled his horse. Then she went inside and climbed the stairs to her room, her mind full of possibilities and her heart full of something she was not quite ready to name. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost sparkling on the ground like scattered diamonds. Victoria dressed warmly and met Vance outside the hotel, where he was waiting with both horses already saddled and ready. They rode out of Fairplay as the sun was climbing above the eastern peaks, following the directions from Victoria's surveyor's map. The land rose steadily as they left the town behind, climbing into high meadow country dotted with stands of aspen and pine. A creek rushed and tumbled over rocks to their right, its water clear and cold, fed by snowmelt from the higher elevations. Victoria felt her excitement building as they rode. This was it, the land her father had dreamed of, the place where she would build her new life. She wondered what the cabin would be like, whether it would need much work, whether she would truly be able to make a go of it on her own. "There," Vance said, pointing ahead to where a small structure sat in a clearing surrounded by trees. "That should be it." They urged their horses forward, and as they drew closer, Victoria could see the cabin more clearly. It was small, perhaps 15 feet by 20, built of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney at one end. The roof appeared to be made of split shingles, and there was a small covered porch across the front. It was rustic and weathered, but it looked solid, and it was hers. They dismounted, and Victoria walked slowly toward the cabin, her hand trailing along the rough bark of the logs. The door was unlocked, hanging slightly askew on leather hinges. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was dim, lit only by the light filtering through a single small window. There was a stone fireplace, a rough table and chair, a bed frame in one corner. The floor was dirt, packed hard by use, and cobwebs draped the corners. It smelled of dust and disuse, but underneath that was the clean scent of pine and the faint smoke of long-dead fires. It was perfect. Victoria turned to find Vance standing in the doorway, watching her. "It needs work," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But it's mine. It's really mine." "It's a good solid structure," Vance said, moving inside to examine the walls and ceiling. "Roof looks sound, no major gaps in the chinking. We'll need to do some repairs, get the door rehung properly, maybe add another window for better light. But your father or whoever built this knew what they were doing." Over the next hour, they explored the property together. The 40 acres included good meadowland, perfect for grazing horses or cattle, and a section of timber that could provide firewood and building materials. The creek formed one boundary of the property, ensuring a reliable water source year-round. There was even a small structure that could serve as a stable, though it needed considerable repair. "You could do well here," Vance said as they stood looking out over the meadow, the mountains rising in the distance beyond. "With some hard work and a bit of luck, you could build a real life." "I intend to." Victoria turned to him, her face flushed with excitement and determination. "I know it won't be easy. I know there will be hard times, especially the first winter. But this is mine, Vance. For the first time in my life, I have something that belongs to me, that I didn't get because of a father or a husband. This is my chance to prove I can make it on my own." Vance looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Victoria." "Maybe not, but I need to prove it to myself." They spent the rest of that day and the next cleaning out the cabin, making lists of supplies and repairs needed, and beginning the work of turning the rough shelter into a proper home. Vance rode back to Fairplay and returned with tools, nails, glass for a second window, and various other necessities. He worked with steady efficiency, his skilled hands making quick work of repairs that would have taken Victoria days to figure out on her own. On the third day, Vance announced that he needed to leave to track down the men who had attacked Victoria's camp. "It's been almost a week," he said, as they stood outside the cabin in the early morning light. "They'll have stopped running by now. Figured I gave up on them. That makes them easier to find." Victoria felt her stomach sink with disappointment, even though she had known this moment was coming. "How long will you be gone?" "A week, maybe 2. Depends on how far they've gotten and whether they give me trouble when I catch up to them." Vance adjusted his hat, not quite meeting her eyes. "Will you be all right here on your own?" "I'll be fine. I have my rifle, and you said there are neighbors within a few miles if I need help." "The Johnsons have a place about 2 miles south of here. Good people. Been here 5 years. If you need anything, ride down there." Vance finally looked at her directly, and she saw concern in his gray eyes. "Be careful, Victoria. Keep your rifle close, and don't take any chances." "I won't. You be careful too." She surprised herself by reaching out and touching his arm. "Come back safe." Something flashed across his face, an emotion too quick for her to identify. "I will. I promise." He mounted his buckskin and rode away without looking back, and Victoria stood watching until he disappeared into the trees. The silence that fell in his absence felt heavier than it should have, and she realized with a start just how much she had come to enjoy his company, how much she had relied on his presence. But she could not afford to dwell on that. She had work to do, a life to build. She threw herself into the task with determination, spending long days hauling water from the creek, gathering firewood, and continuing the repairs on the cabin. She rode into Fairplay and introduced herself to the storekeeper, purchasing supplies with the last of her money and promising to pay off the rest once she had some income. Martha Fletcher took her under wing, introducing her to other women in the community and teaching her the ins and outs of living in the high country. Victoria learned which plants could be harvested for food and medicine, how to preserve meat and vegetables for the winter, and 100 other small skills that would mean the difference between merely surviving and actually thriving. She met the Johnsons, a couple in their 40s with 3 children, who welcomed her warmly and promised to check on her regularly. Their oldest son, Timothy, was 17 and helped Victoria repair her stable in exchange for some sewing work she did for his mother. The days passed in a blur of hard work and small triumphs. Victoria's hands grew calloused, her muscles stronger. She fell into bed each night exhausted but satisfied, feeling herself becoming someone new, someone capable and self-reliant. But she thought about Vance. Every evening as she sat by her fire, every morning as she woke to the sound of birds in the pines, she wondered where he was, whether he was safe, whether he would keep his promise to come back. 2 weeks stretched to 3, and Victoria began to accept that perhaps he was not coming back at all. Maybe he had decided that the pull of the trail was stronger than any reason to return to fair play. Maybe he had found other work, other people who needed his help. Maybe the connection she thought they had shared was only in her imagination, a product of danger and proximity rather than genuine feeling. She was splitting wood behind the cabin on a crisp October afternoon when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart leaped, and she grabbed her rifle before moving cautiously around to the front of the cabin. It was Vance, looking trail-worn and tired but whole. He dismounted slowly, as though his body was stiff and sore, and Victoria felt relief wash over her so intensely that her knees went weak. "You came back," she said, lowering the rifle. "I said I would." Vance's smile was tired but genuine. "Did you doubt me?" "Yes. No. I don't know." Victoria set the rifle aside and wiped her hands on her work apron. "Did you find them?" "I did. They're sitting in the jail in Leadville right now, waiting for trial. The rancher who hired me is satisfied, and I've got enough money to see me through the winter if I'm careful." He looked past her at the cabin, at the neatly stacked firewood and the repaired stable, and the small vegetable garden she had started. "You've been busy." "I had a lot to do. Come inside, I'll make coffee. You look like you could use it." Over coffee and the stew she had simmering on the stove, Vance told her about tracking the 4 men to a mining camp north of Leadville, about the confrontation that had ended with 1 man wounded and the other 3 surrendering. He was matter-of-fact about it, but Victoria could read between the lines, could see the danger he had faced and the violence he had been forced to employ. "I'm glad you're all right," she said when he finished. "I worried." "Did you?" Something in his voice made her look up, and she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Yes, I've gotten used to having you around, I suppose. These past weeks without you have been lonely." "Victoria, I need to tell you something." Vance set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "The whole time I was tracking those men, I couldn't stop thinking about you, about this place, about how it felt right, being here, helping you build something real and lasting. I've spent 7 years drifting, telling myself I preferred being alone, that I didn't need anyone or anything tying me down. But being here with you, it made me realize I was lying to myself." Victoria's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you'll have me, I'd like to stay, not as a hired hand or a temporary helper, but as someone who wants to build a life here with you. I know it's fast. I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You're brave and strong and smart, and when I'm with you, I feel like maybe I could be more than just a man who lives by his gun." Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window, her hands gripping the sill as she tried to process what he was saying. Part of her wanted to throw herself into his arms, to say yes to everything he was offering. But another part, the part that had been hurt and disappointed before, urged caution. "Vance, I care about you, more than I probably should, given how little time we've spent together. But I came here to build something of my own, to prove that I don't need a man to take care of me. If you stay, if we do this, it has to be as partners, equals. I won't give up my independence, not even for you." She heard him stand, heard his boots on the packed dirt floor as he came to stand behind her. He did not touch her, but she could feel the warmth of his presence, the solid reality of him. "I wouldn't want you to. What I admire most about you is your strength, your determination to make your own way. I'm not asking you to give that up. I'm asking if maybe we could be stronger together than we are apart. I have skills you need, and God knows I need someone like you to remind me that there's more to life than the next job, the next town. We could be partners, Victoria. Real partners." She turned to face him, and the look in his eyes made her decision for her. There was vulnerability there, a hope that he was trying to hide but could not quite manage. This man who had faced down 4 armed men without flinching was terrified that she might reject him, and that moved her more than any pretty words could have. "Stay," she said simply. "Help me build this life. Be my partner." The smile that spread across Vance's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, transforming him from someone stern and remote into someone warm and vital and achingly human. He reached for her, and she went into his arms willingly, feeling the strength of his embrace and the rapid beat of his heart against hers. "I'll make you a good partner," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll work hard, and I'll never give you cause to regret this." "I know you will." She pulled back just enough to look up at him. "But Vance, I need you to promise me something. No more tracking dangerous men, no more putting yourself in harm's way. I can't build a life with someone who might not come home one day." He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him wrestling with the idea of giving up the work that had defined him for so long. Finally, he nodded. "I promise. I've got enough money from this last job to buy some livestock, maybe some more tools. We can make this place profitable, Victoria. I know we can. Then let's get started." The kiss, when it came, was tentative at first, as though neither of them quite believed this was really happening. But then it deepened, becoming something hungry and desperate, and full of all the loneliness and longing they had both been carrying. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victoria felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. They spent the rest of that day and evening planning their future, talking about what they would need to do to make the homestead successful. Vance suggested they focus on raising horses, combining his knowledge of horseflesh with the good grazing land. Victoria proposed they also take in work when they could, his tracking and hunting skills and her sewing, to bring in additional income until the horse breeding operation was established. As darkness fell, Vance insisted on sleeping in the stable, saying it would not be proper for him to stay in the cabin with her until they were married. "Married?" Victoria's eyebrows rose. "You're assuming a lot, Vance Brennan." He had the grace to look sheepish. "Sorry, I meant if you wanted to, eventually. I know it's too soon to talk about that." But Victoria found she was smiling. "Ask me again in a few months. If we haven't driven each other crazy by then, maybe I'll say yes." Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm of work and companionship that felt as natural as breathing. Vance proved to be as good as his word, working from dawn to dusk, repairing the stable, building additional structures, and preparing the land for winter. Victoria continued her work in the cabin and garden, and together they made the trip to Fairplay to purchase 3 young mares and a stallion, the foundation of their future breeding program. The neighbors accepted Vance readily once Victoria made it clear that he was staying. The men appreciated his skills and knowledge, while the women looked at Victoria with knowing smiles, clearly reading the romance developing between the 2 young people. As October gave way to November and the first serious snow began to fall, Victoria and Vance found themselves spending more time together in the cabin, driven inside by the cold. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, their fears and dreams. Vance told her about growing up as an orphan, bouncing between relatives who did not really want him, about learning early to rely on himself and trust no one. Victoria shared her own story, about losing her mother young and being raised by a father who was loving but distant, always dreaming of somewhere else. She told him about the loneliness of her life in Kansas, about watching other girls her age marry and start families while she remained alone, about the bitterness of discovering that the man she thought cared for her only wanted her for her inheritance. "He was a fool," Vance said fiercely. "Any man who could not see your worth is not worth a moment of your regret." "I don't regret it anymore," Victoria admitted. "If things had gone differently, I would never have come here. I would never have met you. Then I'm grateful for his stupidity." She laughed, and he pulled her close, and they sat together by the fire, content in each other's presence. On a cold December evening, with snow falling softly outside and the cabin warm from the fire, Vance took Victoria's hands in his and looked into her eyes. "You told me to ask you again in a few months," he said. "Well, it's been 2 months, and every day I've been more certain that you're the person I want to spend my life with. I love you, Victoria. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing by that campfire, scared but refusing to show it. Will you marry me?" Victoria felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. Yes, I'll marry you." They were married in the small church in Fairplay on a bright January day in 1879, with Martha Fletcher and the Johnsons as witnesses. Victoria wore a dress she had made herself from fabric she purchased with money earned from sewing, and Vance wore his best clothes, which were still trail-worn, but clean. It was a simple ceremony, but when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Victoria felt as though she had finally found the place where she belonged. The winter was long and hard, testing them in ways they had not anticipated. There were days when the snow piled so high they could barely get to the stable to feed the horses. Days when the cold was so intense they huddled together by the fire, wrapped in every blanket they owned. But they endured, drawing strength from each other, and when spring finally came in late April, they emerged from the cabin to find their little homestead intact and their small herd of horses thriving. That first spring and summer, they worked harder than Victoria had thought possible. They broke ground for a larger garden, repaired fences, and began the process of training their horses for sale. Vance proved to be a natural horseman, able to gentle even the most fractious animal with patience and skill. Victoria managed the business side, keeping careful records of expenses and income, making the trips to town to negotiate sales and purchase supplies. By the end of their first year of marriage, they had sold 3 well-trained horses for good prices and had a reputation growing in the territory for quality stock. More importantly, they had built a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. They laughed together, worked together, and when they disagreed, they talked through their differences until they found solutions that satisfied them both. Victoria discovered that marriage to Vance was nothing like she had imagined marriage would be. He never tried to control her or diminish her contributions. He asked her opinion on major decisions and valued her input. When she suggested they expand the cabin to include a proper bedroom and a larger living space, he immediately began planning the addition. When he proposed they take in a young Mustang that everyone else said was untrainable, she supported him, even though she worried about the risk. The Mustang, a spirited bay mare they named Wildfire, became one of their most valuable horses, producing strong, intelligent foals that commanded premium prices. In the spring of 1880, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She had seen too many women die in childbirth, and the isolation of their homestead meant that help was not immediately available if something went wrong. Vance was equally thrilled and frightened. "Maybe you should go stay with Martha in town," he suggested, "at least for the last month or so you're close to the doctor." But Victoria refused. "This is our home. I want our child to be born here." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We'll be all right. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Not my wife, not carrying my child." His protectiveness was endearing, even when it bordered on overbearing. As her pregnancy progressed, he fussed over her constantly, insisting she not lift anything heavy or work too hard. Victoria bore it with good humor, knowing it came from love, but she also continued to do what needed doing, refusing to be treated as an invalid. Martha and several of the other women from nearby homesteads promised to come when her time arrived, and Vance made sure they had everything they might need laid by well in advance. Their son was born on a snowy November night, entering the world with a loud cry that announced his displeasure at the cold. Vance, who had faced armed men without flinching, turned pale and nearly fainted at the sight of blood, but he stayed by Victoria's side, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. "He's perfect," Victoria breathed, cradling the tiny bundle to her chest. "He's absolutely perfect." "He looks like you," Vance said, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed down at his son. "He has your eyes." They named him Victor Benjamin, combining parts of both their names, and from the moment he was born, he transformed their lives in ways they could never have anticipated. Vance proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to walk the floor with a fussy baby, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply watching his son sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. Victoria marveled at the changes in the man she had married. The hard edges that had defined him when they first met had softened, worn away by love and purpose. He smiled more, laughed more easily, and the shadows that used to haunt his eyes had faded. As Victor grew from infant to toddler, the homestead continued to prosper. They added more horses to their breeding program, built additional structures, and expanded their land through careful purchases from neighbors who decided the harsh life was not for them. By 1883, they were well established as one of the most successful horse breeders in the region, their stock sought after throughout Colorado territory. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, dealt with illness and injury, and overcome every challenge the land and life threw at them. Through it all, their love for each other deepened and matured, evolving from the passionate intensity of new romance into something richer and more enduring. In the evenings after Victor was asleep and the day's work was done, they would sit together on the porch Vance had built, looking out over the meadow where their horses grazed. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, but always there was the sense of being exactly where they belonged. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked one summer evening in 1884 as they watched the sun set behind the mountains. "Giving up your old life, settling down here?" Vance pulled her closer against his side. "Not for a single moment. That wasn't a life, Victoria. It was just existence, moving from place to place with no real purpose. This is a life. You, Victor, this land, the horses, building something that will last beyond us. This is everything I never knew I wanted." "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too. I think I've loved you from the moment I stepped into that firelight and saw you refusing to surrender to fear. My hero, coming out of the darkness to save me." He laughed softly. "You saved yourself, darling. You were already handling those men before I showed up. I just provided some extra incentive for them to leave. Maybe, but you gave me so much more than that. You gave me partnership, support, love. You helped me build this life I dreamed of. We built it together. That's what makes it worth having." In 1885, their daughter was born, a tiny girl with Victoria's red hair and Vance's determined chin. They named her Rose, and she completed their family in a way that felt perfect and right. Victor, now 4 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help care for her. The homestead continued to grow and thrive. They hired occasional help during busy seasons, usually young men from town looking for work, and they became known as fair employers who treated their workers well. Their reputation grew beyond Colorado, with buyers coming from as far away as Wyoming and Kansas to purchase their horses. In 1887, Colorado became a state, and fair play continued to develop from a rough frontier town into a real community. The changes were sometimes hard to accept, but they also brought benefits: better roads, more reliable mail service, a real school that Victor could attend. Through all the changes, external and internal, Victoria and Vance remained the constant center of each other's lives. They faced the challenges of raising children, of running a business, of aging and changing together. There were disagreements, of course, moments of frustration and misunderstanding, but they had learned early on how to work through their differences. On their 10th wedding anniversary in January 1889, Vance took Victoria's hand across the dinner table and smiled at her, with all the love of a decade of marriage shining in his eyes. 10 years, he said. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we've been together forever. Both are true, I think. Victoria looked around their expanded cabin, now a proper house with multiple rooms, glass windows, and even a piano she had purchased last year with her earnings from a big horse sale. Victor was 8, already showing signs of his father's skill with horses. Rose was 4, bright and curious and full of boundless energy. We've built a good life, haven't we? The best life I could have imagined. Vance raised his glass of cider in a toast. To my remarkable wife, who took a chance on a drifter with nothing to offer but his heart. To my brave cowboy, who came out of the darkness to save me and ended up giving me everything I never knew I needed. They touched glasses, and in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of home and family, Victoria thought back to that terrifying night by the campfire over a decade ago. She had been so scared, so alone, facing an uncertain future with nothing but her courage to sustain her. And then Vance had appeared, stepping into the firelight like something out of a dream, and everything had changed. Sometimes when she was out in the meadow with the horses or working in her garden, she would pause and look around at all they had built together. The house, the barns, the fences, the thriving herd. Victor learning to rope and ride, Rose singing to herself as she played, Vance working nearby, always within sight, his presence a constant reassurance. This was home. This was family. This was the life her father had dreamed of when he purchased this land, and Victoria knew he would be proud of what she had made of his gift. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Victor grew into a strong, capable young man, his skill with horses matching his father's. Rose proved to have her mother's head for business, already helping keep the books by the time she was 10. They added a third child in 1891, another son they named Daniel, who came into the world with an easy disposition and a ready smile. Vance's hair began to show threads of silver at his temples, and lines of laughter appeared around Victoria's eyes. They earned each mark of age together, wearing them as badges of honor, proof that they had lived and loved and survived. In 1895, Victor married a young woman from town, a teacher named Sarah, and brought her to live at the homestead. Vance and Victoria gladly welcomed her, and the following year, they became grandparents when Sarah gave birth to a daughter. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Victoria felt the circle of life completing itself in the most beautiful way. The homestead, which had started as 40 acres and a rough cabin, had grown to over 200 acres of prime grazing land, with a main house, multiple barns, a bunkhouse for the hands they now employed year-round, and a second house where Victor and Sarah lived with their growing family. The Brennan horses were known throughout the western states as some of the finest available, and buyers came from hundreds of miles away to purchase their stock. But more than the material success, Victoria and Vance had built something even more valuable, a legacy of love, hard work, and family that would endure long after they were gone. On a warm summer evening in 1898, as they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Victoria looked at her husband across the crowded dining table and felt her heart swell with gratitude. Vance caught her eye and winked, and she knew he was thinking the same thing she was, that they had been impossibly lucky, finding each other in the vastness of the frontier, two lonely souls who had somehow become whole together. After dinner, when the younger generation had dispersed to their own pursuits, Vance took Victoria's hand and led her outside to their favorite spot on the porch. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the evening air was sweet with the scent of wildflowers. 20 years, Vance said, settling into the chair he had built 2 decades ago and pulling Victoria down to sit beside him. And it still doesn't feel like enough time. We have years yet, Victoria assured him, though she knew that time was precious and not to be taken for granted. They had both reached their 40s, still healthy and strong, but aware that life in the high country took its toll. I hope so. I want decades more with you, centuries if I could have them. He kissed her temple gently. You know, sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that I have you, that we built all this together. It feels like something I dreamed up during a cold night on the trail. It's real. Victoria laced her fingers through his. We're real, and we're going to keep being real for a long time to come. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had shone down on them that first night when Victoria thought her life might end, and instead found it was just beginning. She thought about the woman she had been then, scared and alone, but determined to forge her own path. She had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams, not because she had done it alone, but because she had found the courage to let someone walk beside her. Vance had been her partner in every sense of the word, working alongside her, supporting her dreams while pursuing his own, building a life that honored both their strengths. He had never tried to diminish her or control her, had never seen her independence as a threat to his masculinity. Instead, he had celebrated it, encouraged it, and loved her all the more for it. And she had given him something equally precious, a home, a family, a place to belong. She had seen him transform from a lonely drifter into a devoted husband and father, from a man who lived by his gun into a man who built and nurtured and created. The dangerous edge that had drawn her to him initially was still there, buried beneath layers of domesticity, but ready to surface if his family was threatened, but it no longer defined him. "What are you thinking about?" Vance asked, his voice soft in the gathering darkness. "About how grateful I am, for you, for all of this. For that night when you came out of the darkness to save me. I didn't save you, Victoria. You saved me. You gave me a reason to stop running, a reason to believe I could be more than what I had been. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." She turned to kiss him, a long, slow kiss that held 20 years of love and passion and partnership. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "We saved each other then," Victoria said, "and we built something beautiful in the process." "The most beautiful thing in the world," Vance agreed. They remained on the porch long into the night, talking and reminiscing, planning for the future and celebrating the past. And when they finally went inside to their bed, they did so hand in hand, as they had every night for 20 years, as they would continue to do for all the years to come. The homestead thrived for decades more, passing down through generations of Brennans who maintained the traditions of quality and integrity that Victoria and Vance had established. The original cabin, where it all began, was preserved as a reminder of humble beginnings and the courage it took to build something from nothing. Victoria and Vance lived to see their children grown and settled, their grandchildren reaching adulthood, and even the birth of great-grandchildren. They grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year, their bond growing stronger rather than weaker with time. On a cool autumn evening in 1915, Victoria and Vance sat together on their porch one last time, both in their 70s now, but still clear-minded and devoted to each other. The homestead stretched out before them, a testament to everything they had built together over more than 3 decades of marriage. "No regrets?" Victoria asked, as she had asked so many times over the years. "Not a single one," Vance replied, as he always did. "You are and always have been the best thing that ever happened to me. And you to me, my cowboy who came out of the darkness. Your partner, your equal, your love. Always," Victoria promised, "in this life and whatever comes after." They sat together as the sun set one more time, painting the Colorado sky in brilliant colors, content in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved deeply. They had built not just a homestead, but a legacy, not just a marriage, but a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. Their story became part of the history of Fairplay and the surrounding territory, told and retold as an example of frontier courage and enduring love. The woman who had traveled west alone to claim her independence, and the man who had appeared out of darkness to save her, only to discover that in saving her, he had saved himself. Together, they had carved out a life in the wilderness, raised a family, built a thriving business, and most importantly, loved each other with a depth and constancy that stood as a beacon for all who knew them. Their love story was not one of easy romance or simple fairy tales, but of hard work, mutual respect, deep friendship, and an unwavering commitment to building something lasting together. And in the end, that was everything that mattered. They had found each other against all odds in the vast emptiness of the frontier, and they had created something beautiful and enduring that would outlast them both. Their descendants would work the land for generations to come, but more than the land or the horses or the material wealth, what Victoria and Vance left behind was the example of what love could build when given the chance to flourish. The Brennan homestead stood for over a century as a testament to their vision and their love, a reminder that sometimes the most important thing we can do is take a chance on the person standing beside us in the darkness, offering their hand and their heart, promising to walk the difficult path together rather than face it alone.